Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. This webinar is in partnership with the Therefore Alliance. And today we're going to be talking about how to choose a missions organization. The Therefore Alliance is an alliance of mission organizations committed to sharing resources and opportunities with one another in order to best fulfill the Great Commission, rather than building an individual brand as each organization. You'll have a chance to hear more about each of these organizations at the end of our time today. But today we have someone from each organization here to talk with us about how to choose a missions agency. So I'll introduce them briefly. Kyler Keith is the Director of Recruitment and Mobilization at Crossworld. Rachel Powells is the Regional Missions Coach at Send. Tracy Coley is the Mobilization Coordinator for South America Mission. And Anna Price is the Director of Mobilization at Team. And my name is Kirsten Collins. I'm a Missions Coach at Team, and I'll be your host today. Thanks for joining us. We're going to dive right in because we've got a lot of content to cover. But we wanted to start with just hearing some initial thoughts about why to go with an agency in the first place. Rachel, could you tell us a little bit about why it's a good idea to go with an agency?
Sure. Yeah, so, ideally, the local church will be the ones to send out missionaries, but most times the church doesn't have the same missions expertise that a sending agency would have, or even the capacity and time to resource their missionaries as well as they could in partnership with an organization to help take some of that burden off. So our sole job as a missions agency is to be global missions experts, to work alongside of your church in order to help send missionaries well, to prepare them, to do training, provide support and resources. And we offer, support system for missionaries in a couple different ways. So, logistically, an agency helps with receiving of funds if you're raising support, helps with medical benefits, retirement, pre-field training, even things such as, finding housing on the field or connecting with a school for your children. And then also it just provides the support of a team on the field as well, a team of people who have the same shared mission and vision of you and the organization, a team that can provide accountability and structure, and then also just that spiritual and emotional support of having that team on the field, where it can oftentimes be pretty lonely with language barriers and a new culture. And I also think of the situation in Ukraine right now, and just how no matter how safe you think a place might be, you really never know what could happen. And so having the backing of an agency who has, a contingency plan in place and a security director and a crisis response team should something go awry, I think is of the utmost importance.
What are some other reasons someone might choose to go with an agency, Kyler?
Yeah, so while Rachel greatly explained the majority of the reasons why individuals would love to go with an agency overseas, there are other ways, and one in particular is to take your profession overseas, specifically with a job. So if a company is looking to transfer you overseas, or you're looking to build a company, either from the ground up or an idea of a couple of different people of moving over there, an agency is going to be able to help you provide some expertise in various ways, whether that's financial expertise or professional expertise, to encourage you and to walk alongside you, to pray for you, and then also to evaluate you. How are you doing? Do we think that this is sustainable? Are you going to be able to have this company, this job, for the length of the duration of your mission? Mission agencies can also be help you connect with like-minded individuals, and that could be here in the States, but it also can be in a profession overseas, or maybe even in the region that you're wanting to go. And so they do have a lot of resources and opportunities for individuals that are looking to live on mission overseas. We're called in scripture to live in community. And so we believe that here in the States, but we also believe that overseas, and feel like you should be disciple making wherever you are, but also using your God-given talents and skills to do that. And so if you feel like you want to do that in a profession or a job, an agency is going to be able to provide you with those resources.
There's a lot of great reasons to consider going with an agency. Once you've decided that you do want to pursue going with an agency, there's a lot of options to choose from. I mean, even beyond the 4 of these organizations here today. But what are some things that you should consider when you're discerning what specific agency to choose?
Yeah, so I think 3 of the questions that we'll be really exploring today are: where are you coming from, where are you right now, and where are you going? So ultimately, the heart behind doing missions, it cross-culturally, is that you're engaging in ministry locally, and then when you move internationally, it's just an extension of the ministry that you're already engaged with. So the idea of where are you coming from, what church are you involved with, are there nonprofits or different resources within your local community that you're engaged with? What are your gifts and passions? What's some prior missions experience or cross-culture experience you have? Where are you right now? What is God currently teaching you? I know when I was exploring opportunities to serve overseas, I was reading through the book of Psalms, and I really felt God teaching me a lot about his heart for mercy and justice. And I saw this pattern of God being close to the poor and the needy and the brokenhearted. And I really felt God pulling my heart towards that as well, to engage in that type of ministry. I think it's also really important to just see mentors or people, the community that's surrounding you, and the ways that they're speaking into your life, into your heart. What is God teaching you about his kingdom, and revealing where there are needs within the world? And then where are you going? So what kind of a structure do you need? What kind of support do you need when considering going overseas? What type of ministry do you want to engage with? And what organizations can really surround you with that to help you get there? And like I said at the beginning, it's really crucial to consider where you're currently involved. I think sometimes people have this idea of, oh, once I move overseas, then I can start doing something. But the reality is it's going to be so much harder when you're engaging in a different culture. Now, different cultures offer different opportunities that you might not have here, but I think it is really important to really just process through where you are right now, and see how God could just use you serving internationally as an extension of that.
Obviously, choosing, well, going into missions and some of the things that you've mentioned, Tracy, a lot of it is dependent on relationships, and that's from start to finish, from building your network and being sent out by a church and an agency to the work that you're actually doing on the field. What are some of the relationships or connections that someone should consider as they think about choosing an agency?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the number one that most of us would say first thing is your local church. So finding out, does your local church already have connections to a certain missions agency or ministry? Because if they have that experience with them, they'll be able to help you set proper expectations for going forward. They'll be able to say like, yeah, I think that's a good fit for you, or that might be a struggle, or maybe they don't have the services that you need. I think another great resource is former missionaries. If you're have other missionaries who have served in the past around you, asking them about, hey, how did an agency help you? How did your agency specifically help you? Kind of get the real story, right, from the people who have experienced it. And then if you know any people who are living overseas in the place where you want to serve or you're considering serving, asking about the reputation, like, hey, do you know about this agency? Do you know, like, are they respectful to you guys? Do they listen to you? And kind of having those connections as well. If you don't have any of those connections, then I think asking the agency that you're talking to, like, hey, can I talk to some missionaries and get their take as well, I think is a really great step for you to build those connections.
One of the things that you just mentioned, Anna, is expectations and trying to set realistic expectations, even as you're thinking about choosing an agency. Rachel, can you talk a little bit just about how to think through that ahead of time?
Yeah, I think that's really important because we all have expectations of what the mission field is going to be like, whether we realize it or not. Sometimes we don't even know that we have certain expectations until we get to the field. But I think that it's important to start fleshing those out, even in the discovery phases, and thinking through, okay, in my mind, when I think of missions, what do I think that life might be like on the field? What do I expect my work to look like? And just start thinking through some of those things and talking with your church and talking through some of those things, and even talking with a mobilizer from an organization, or like Anna said, a missionary or someone who has done missions work in the past, and asking, are these expectations realistic? And then from there, starting to look for an organization that aligns with those expectations and desires that you have for your time on the field.
I think it's also really important to think about the expectations that the organization would have of you too, and ask about that as you're trying to set expectations. Tracy, one thing I wanted to ask you about is that you've actually transitioned from one agency to another one. How did God lead you through that process of transitioning between organizations?
Yeah, so after I graduated from college, I served for 2 years with a campus ministry overseas. Now, my circumstances were a little bit special because of COVID. I was in Brazil when COVID first started and came back early. And then the second year, I was serving virtually with Peruvian students while living in Puerto Rico. So I think throughout that process, God used it a lot to just introduce me to so many different cultures. I think it was really incredible to experience God through different cultural lenses. I was learning different languages throughout that process. I was serving on a team and growing a lot relationally and as a leader. But then when it was coming to the end of my time with this campus ministry, I think I was just reevaluating what I was really looking for in missions, and particularly in a missions agency that could sustain me for a longer period of time. I think at the end of each of the years that I was serving, I kind of came back feeling pretty burnt out. And there were so many circumstances where I found myself not really thriving in the type of ministry we were doing. I think it just wasn't utilizing my gifts and passions as much as I was hoping. And so when I was coming to the end of my contract, I was kind of looking around at different missions organizations. I felt really called to go back and serve in Brazil. I just absolutely love that culture. I love Portuguese. I loved everything about my experience there. And so when I first heard about South America Mission, I was really intrigued because I saw that they were serving in Brazil, and I first connected with them and was asking about some of the work that they do there. And I think that, as I mentioned before, I was reading through the book of Psalms and just felt like God was really tugging my heart towards working in some sort of community development, engaging with a neighborhood or a city where there was just a lot of need, and learning how to bring the gospel to people through seeing to their tangible needs. And so when I first was talking with Sam, I really felt like God was opening up the door for this ministry that I felt really passionate about, and I could get behind their vision. I think something that really stuck out to me with Sam as well was their application process. We really take it as a discernment process. And so filling out a portion of the application, hopping on a video call with someone from the home office, and really just pressing into your story, pressing into where God may be calling you, discerning together whether we're a good fit for the mission or the mission's a good fit for us. And so I think really just experiencing that intentionality from the home office was something that I didn't experience in the organization I was serving with before. And I knew that I wanted to be with an organization that was really pursuing me and really caring for me while I was overseas. And I think I also just really valued how much Sam valued the local church. And so it's really at the heart of Sam to support local churches internationally and for all of their missionaries to be sent by their local church in the States. And so I think seeing that they really desired for me to be engaged here in the United States before going overseas, and also just really pressing into my church and having them send me and be kind of a group of believers behind me and supporting me overseas is something that was really encouraging for me. And I think that, yeah, throughout this process, God was just reaffirming and instilling confidence in me that this switch of agencies would be a good fit for a longer term service overseas.
I think, Tracy, your story just really illustrates what it looks like to look at all the different aspects of an organization and find something that's a good fit at every level of the things that you're looking for. But if you've got a variety of missions agencies on the table that seem like they could be a good fit, how do you start the process of narrowing down the options?
Yes, and there are a lot of options, as most of us on the screen are aware. And every agency does have its own personality, their own values, strategies, but it is important to find the right fit. So that way, for the long haul, you and your ministry are going to thrive as much as you can. And so knowing that, the first thing that you should be doing is praying, right? You should be praying through this whole process, but really praying to the Lord of the harvest that he helps you discern with some of these decisions, especially if you have a few that you just aren't really sure which route you should take. But one of the first things you should be looking at with agencies in particular is if their doctrine aligns with your doctrine, and if their values align with your values and what you're wanting to do overseas. That can look in various different ways. You can research that online or through the website or talking to a mobilizer or a recruiter. But those are going to be some pretty tangible ways just to kind of work through some of your options. The next would be having a general idea, or maybe you don't have a general idea, but if you had an idea of a general area and where you wanted to serve, and maybe even what you wanted to do. There are obviously going to be agencies that specialize in certain places. There are going to be agencies that don't specialize in certain places, but maybe they specialize in a profession like teaching, and then they have several options in different regions of the world. And so as you start to ask yourself those questions, pray through those questions, talk to agencies, hopefully you start to kind of narrow down where, in what region, or maybe even if it's a couple different regions, or maybe even a few different possibilities, but that should start to help you narrow down, okay, is this agency in a region that I'm thinking about going, or is it an agency that I can go with to help me do what I want to do when I get over there? And then it's also good to know if they have similar field workers with those skills. Are there people that you can look to that can mentor you with certain things, or are you going to be a pioneer? Are you going to try to go somewhere where no one else has gone? Does that agency even allow that? And so those are really important things to look at when you're doing that. The other thing would be access. There are some limited access opportunities, visas, COVID. There's a lot of different barriers, even just trying to get to certain locations. And so that's always something to keep in mind as you're looking around. Another option too to consider is funding, right? And so do they offer positions that are paid? Do they offer positions that are support raised? Is it a combination? What are you led to do? What are you called to do? There are Thailand, for example, there are many teaching opportunities that they pay you, but you can't afford to live off of that based on various things. And so a lot of our teachers in Thailand have to support raise a little bit. And so it's about 50-50. And, it's a lot quicker of a process and you have some reliable income there. But that's not for everybody, right? Or just depending on their options, if they're getting sent through their church and they're willing and want to raise support to fund their own business, those are just things that you need to keep in mind. The other option is, the other thing to consider is your family. If you're single, if you're young, newly married, or if you have 5 children, that definitely could affect where you're going, what you're doing, and what agency you go with. What resources do they have for families? What school options do they have? Are there homeschool options? Are there virtual options? Are there international schools? And again, salary versus support raising could be a factor in that as well. The other thing too is that there are agencies that primarily focus on long-term placement, and there are some that focus on short-term placement, and there are some that focus on both. So how long do you want to go for? Are you seeing yourself going for 25 years? You probably shouldn't go with the short-term agency. Are you wanting to just do a vision trip to even see if it's something that you're wanting to do long-term? Might be beneficial to start with an agency that focuses on short-term trips. What does that even mean? That it depends on the agency, right? Ours is a year or less. Some are 1 week. Some don't offer anything over 2 years. And so it really just does depend on how long you envision yourself and feeling led to go over there, short or long term. And also this idea of mentorship. So a lot of agencies tend to focus on various things, and all of us are going to have our strengths and weakness and weaker areas. But what does their member care look like? What counseling options do they have? What access to community do they have? What emergency plans do they have? What development plans do they have? And that there's a wide range of a wide net with development. So that could be spiritual development, financial development, ministry development, personal development. And a lot of this stuff you can find online, or doing a webinar, or talking to someone at a university fair, or a phone call or an email. And some of this stuff you might have to get a little bit deeper, have a couple of different conversations. But again, we're just trying to give you an idea of how you start to pare down some of your options. The last thing too, for my end, for my sake, would just be their expertise. Again, what are their field staff doing? Do they have business coaching, career coaching? Do you get assessed when you're on the field? Do they have language or cultural training beforehand? Do they have any partners to help you find jobs, or community partners to help you have a church family once you get over there? And so those are just some maybe a little bit broader things to consider and to pray through as you're starting the process.
That's great, Kyler. I think too, like, there are just so many different ways that a missions organization is set up, like the actual structure. So there are 2 big buckets. There are umbrella agencies that really are kind of just a place for you to do your tax deductible funds for people to donate to you. And then there are full service agencies that offer all the things we've been mentioning today. The 4 of us are full service agencies, so we might be a little biased on that end. But that structure is important. I think it's important to know, like, do you want to enter into an organization that is a large organization, maybe has more resources available, or more brand recognition? That sounds weird, but is that important to your community as you're fundraising, to have a name that they're familiar with behind you? Sometimes that's really important. Or do you want a smaller organization that's able to pivot and able to really welcome you in a different way that may be more family oriented? Leadership on the field is also really important. Like, what does the team structure look like on the field? I will say, I don't think going to an agency because you really liked 1 or 2 people that you met there is a good reason to go, because missions world is transient. The Lord calls people places all the time. And so if you kind of base your calling on 1 person being there with you, that might be a little bit difficult. I wouldn't recommend that. But understanding the team, I think good communication is so key. And so if you are talking to someone from an agency and you just feel like they're not communicating well or getting back to you, that might be indicative of just their home office staff capacity as a whole. I know all the home office staff people that I know, they want to serve the missionaries, but if at the front end of the process, they're not able to kind of keep up with your questions, then that would be concerning to me, something to look at. And then 2, can the person you're talking to answer, what are the weaknesses of your organization? Or are they just trying to sell you? I think a good process to get into an organization is just as much about you getting to know the organization as the organization getting to know you. And so make sure you ask those hard questions and see how they react. See if you feel like the answers kind of pair with what God's calling you to do.
Yeah, and I'll add, Kyler mentioned vision trips. So, this might not be feasible for everyone, but if possible, take a vision trip or even maybe a longer short term with an organization. Some organizations have like 3 months to a year program, get your feet wet a little bit, get to know the teams on the field for yourself and see if this is, a team that the Lord might be calling you to join. If possible, I think that really there is no better way to get to know an organization and a team than to experience that in person yourself and with your family before maybe making that longer term commitment with the organization.
We've talked a lot about like some of the positive things about determining an agency that's a good fit for you. If you're in the process, what are some things that might help you discern if it's not the right fit for you?
I think something that Anna kind of mentioned is it should be like a two-way street. That organization should be sharing as much with you as you are with them throughout your application. And so I think something that would kind of be maybe a red flag for me is if the organization feels like they're hiding something or they're just selling me the high points or trying to recruit me, because at the end of the day, like, I don't think that recruiting is really like we say that we're mobilizers because really we're coming alongside of you to help prepare you and send you well so that you can serve God's kingdom. We're not here to recruit you or try and sell anything to you or try to convince you why you should serve with us. And so I think that would be huge, is just seeing the transparency and humility of the organization.
Yeah, I would say too. Oh, go ahead, Rachel.
I was just going to say, to add to that, ideally an organization is going to want you to find the best fit for you as well. So, as much as we all want you to join our organizations, ideally any organization is going to be a win for the kingdom. And that's what we would want for you. So whether that's with our organization or someone else, hopefully an organization is just helping you find the best fit and not solely just trying to, sell you, for lack of a better term, on their organization.
Absolutely. And I think that's like the beauty of Therefore Alliance and even just the broader mobilization community, is that all of us kind of are aware enough about the other organizations' strengths and personalities, as Kyler said, that we can say like, oh, hey, we don't work there, but Sin does. Let me get you in touch with Rachel. And having a mobilizer who's connected with the broader mobilization community is really helpful. That's what I'd add.
So as you're starting to narrow down a bit, just practically speaking, what are the next steps that someone should take as they get closer to narrowing down?
For me, I think the first thing is, of course, prayer. And that sounds like, of course, the missions people said that you pray about it. But I truly believe that the Lord is going to help you discern the right fit and even put people in your path that maybe you didn't even realize they served with the missions agency, or maybe you didn't know that they were connected with the missions agency. He's going to start opening up your eyes to those things. But then the second thing is to write down your expectations. And I would really encourage you to sit down with someone at your church and do that. Like, what does your church need someone to do to help you get to the mission field and be successful? What do you need to be successful? And if expectations feels like that's a hard question to answer at this point, maybe write down your fears. Like, what are the things that would make you not thrive in missions work? And how do you think you're going to need help to overcome them? And that might help you start to write down those things. So whenever you come to a mobilizer, you kind of already know what you're looking for.
I'd also say to give yourself some grace. You can't know what you don't know, and a lot of times, most of the time, maybe all the time, it might take longer than you're thinking, and kind of goes along with the fears and the expectations that Anna was talking about, of like, an agency in particular is going to help you with that timeline of like, realistically, this is how we have seen this going. And for you to be successful, there may be some things that you need to work through. Maybe even sin that you need to work through before we want you to thrive. You know, if you're telling us you want to be there for 10 years, we are going to do everything we can to make sure that that happens. But there might be some work that you as the candidate need to do as well. And you need to prepare yourself for that, for the agency to come back and say, that's all great, but here are some things that we feel like need to happen before you can get over there, to be successful, because the last thing we want is for you to come right back. And we all probably on the screen have seen that, and we try our best to avoid that at all costs. So giving yourself some grace in that it's going to take some time, and that we all have a process that we go through for various reasons. But also don't be afraid to ask questions. Write down those expectations, write down those fears, write down those questions. And Tracy was kind of alluding this too, but like an agency, a mobilizer, a coach should be answering those questions, should be answering those hard questions. And if they don't know it, they should be finding those answers for you. We want you to have as much information as possible before you waste your time in the process. But again, even still, you can get pretty far in a process. And if you feel at any time that it's not a match, it's not a fit, you're just feeling led somewhere else, that's okay. And we really are in the greater mission of getting you to the field with the appropriate people and placing you in the right placement. If that's not with our specific organization, that's okay. And we want to make sure that you're getting the proper training and care before you go over there. Yeah, so that's my take.
Mm-hmm. And I think to add on to what Kyler was saying with like giving yourself grace throughout the process and in the waiting, yeah, just patience is so crucial. What is God teaching you right now, and how is He preparing you here and now before sending? And so a little part of my own story, I kind of mentioned before, I served overseas a couple of years with a different organization. But right now I'm in Ohio, and that's why I'm working with Sam as their mobilizer. I asked specifically to stay in Ohio for a year before returning to the field, because I just needed some space to breathe, to be with my family, be with my friends, to just kind of like settle down. I'd moved so much throughout the past 2 years just due to COVID and the circumstances surrounding me. And so I recognized that that was an area that I just like needed some space in. But also within that, I think it was really cool to see the ways that God was so kind and gracious to me in this space. I'm actually living in a house right now that is connected both to my church and to a nonprofit that they started that focuses on community development. So I'm actually living in that community and engaging with this nonprofit. And it's been a really sweet learning opportunity for me, knowing that I'll be stepping into ministry that is more focused on community development. And also like just seeing the opportunities God has provided for me to really engage with a community group in my church. My pastor has been mentoring me in theology and different studies, and I have space to support Raise and everything. And so I think that just having patience and realizing that even if your timeline is longer, if it's not looking like you'll be on the field for a year or 2 or 3 years or more, like that doesn't mean that God won't be using you in ministry now. And that doesn't mean that all of the ministry will happen overseas without you before you even get there. It just means that God has you where you are for a very particular reason. And I think that it's a challenge, but also like pursue what God is using this time for. Don't see it as an obstacle, but see it as an opportunity.
I think sometimes we think that we're going to go overseas and do something totally different than we are doing here at home. And I think that it is important to use this time, even as you're researching different organizations and ideally preparing for the field, using this time to invest locally in your church and looking for opportunities to be serving in your community. Maybe it's with international students at a local university, or gaining some sort of multicultural experience before you even go overseas, and preparing yourself in that way, so that when the time comes, you have some experience already, and maybe the Lord starts moving your heart towards a specific people group or a specific type of work that you didn't even realize you had a burden for, because you start to serve that population in your own community.
I would add something that Tracy, I've heard you say before about this, was to, like, as we're talking about finding the right fit for you, like no matter what community you join in, it's going to be imperfect, and there are going to be things that aren't the right fit that rub against you, and that I think is part of God's refinement and sanctification in our lives. And so I think you know, as we're looking at the right fit, I think that's a good question to ask, but I think it's also a good question to ask, like, is the broader community, is the broader mission something that I feel okay to submit to in some way? So Tracy, I don't know if you want to add to that, because you're the person who originally said it.
Yeah, and I think that final phrase that you added to of like being able, like willing to submit to it, like find an organization that you really respect, and that you can trust will take care of you. I think that's something that I've seen kind of like within my mobilizations, seeing like the good and bad examples of, it's really difficult when we have missionaries that kind of come in with their own ideas and are like, I'm ready to go. And it's like exciting to see the passion, but also it can be kind of discouraging if they are kind of contradicting some of our desires or some of the ways that we handle ministry. And yeah, so I would just say, like, find an organization that you trust to take care of you, an organization that you align with. As Kyler mentioned earlier, like make sure that you're in alignment with them doctrinally and theologically. And yeah, I think that that really goes a long way.
As we're talking about kind of like tangible next steps, I'm gonna throw a little bit of a curveball at you, but I'd love for you guys each to share too, like, what does it look like for someone who's in the process of bearing down, and what agency they like to go to? Like, what does that initial connection with your specific organization look like? Who would they talk to? How would they reach out to you?
Yeah, for Sam, if you go on our website, you can click on join now, and then there will be a drop down. And if you hit apply now, you can fill out a preliminary information form. I know the language apply now sounds scary, like you're committing to something. I felt the same way when I was filling out my preliminary information. I was like, oh no, I don't know if I'm ready for this. But I promise it's not a trap or anything. That is just our way to get some basic information on you so that we can better prepare for that initial call, so that we have some talking points, and so we can just better engage with you and your story. And so by filling out that form, your information will be sent to me, and then I'll follow up and schedule a video call with you. And then with that, like, we don't really have like a strict timeline or system or anything. Like the first few calls, we really just want to get to know you, to share more about our organization, to hear about what you're looking for, and then together discern if God is leading us towards starting an application. And so once we get into the application process, that's when it's a little more, I guess, structured, as we go through specific questions and background and story and everything. But for those initial calls, it's very just kind of get to know each other.
Yeah, very similar with team. You can email mobilization@team.org, or we've got a place on our webpage where you can talk to a mission coach. I know most of us hate phone calls, but the initial thing is just having a phone call with the missions coach, and they'll ask questions like, not, are you ready to give your life away right this moment to team, but more like, tell me about how God's working in your life. Tell me about what missions means to you, and really just trying to get to know you in a way to be like, okay, what is your next step in missions? And they're really there to do what it says. And I see everyone nodding. All of our organizations are very similar in this. It's that, it may be that they give you a recommendation to take a class like Perspectives or something to learn more about missions. They may say, here, there are some short-term opportunities that I really feel like you should kind of take that step first, or, hey, here's the application. Let's go overseas for 20 years. But that phone call, while it sounds scary, those 15 minutes on the phone, I think hopefully we design them to be a blessing for you, in a way to just, whether you talk to us again or not, a way that you're encouraged in your missions journey.
Yeah, Send is same page as everybody else. We just have like a little get started form on our website that you can fill out, just a little bit of basic information, and then that will go to one of our missions coaches. So we are, divided by region across the US. So someone in your general area will reach out to you, and same thing, just have that initial phone call, get to know you a little bit. So I would encourage you, even if you're just curious about missions, you're not ready for any sort of commitment, take that step just to talk to someone and pick our brains a little bit and help us get to know you and see where things go from there.
Yeah, at Crossroads, same thing. It's a very similar process. A few things that maybe weren't mentioned that I'm sure are true. It also doesn't have to be a phone call or a virtual call. If you're in an area that we have a recruiter or a mobilizer, now it seems that we're able to start meeting in person a little bit more. And so again, it's an initial conversation, taking you to coffee, get to know you a little bit, just so they can understand how they can help you in that journey. You may be years away from wanting to go or not even sure that you want to go. And that's totally fine. The conversation can just be like, here's some resources on why you should consider going overseas, or, let's meet again in a year after you're graduated from college or are done student teaching, and then we can talk about what opportunities we have. So I feel like any of those initial calls are really not necessarily have to be geared towards the end result of you going overseas. It could literally just be like, I'm not even sure I'm called to do this. I know all of our agencies have whatever we're calling them, guides, coaches, mobilizers, recruiters, are all wanting to have that initial conversation with you so they can just better understand how to help come alongside you and to pray for you. And if it is that you want to go sooner rather than later, okay, great, let's talk through that process. But if it's like, I'm not even sure I want to go, they'd love to connect with you even still. So virtual, obviously an option, phone calls, but in person as well. And that even goes to events, conferences. Does your school have a ministry fair or a career fair? We have an events page that you can go to, and you can just literally see a list of where we're going to be. So if it's that you want to connect with someone in person, like try to find where we're going to be. We in particular, but I know everyone else on the screen we're literally scattered all over the country. And so depending on where you live, I'm sure that there's going to be someone even in your local area that we could connect you with just to have that conversation with. So yeah, but we want to tailor it to you, right? So if you're more comfortable with phone call, virtual, in person, whatever it is, we're happy to do that as well. Obviously, we're all probably really, maybe we don't love it, but maybe we're all used to virtual and maybe not as used to doing in-person stuff anymore. But I know that our team, our recruitment and mobilization team have loved getting together in person and just sharing, breaking bread with someone, even in their own home, if that's something that people are comfortable with down the line. So yeah, but definitely don't be afraid to reach out to any of the organizations on their Connect page or Go page or Get Started page, because we really just want to understand what it is that you're looking for and what resources we can provide to get you to that next step.
Hopefully what you're hearing from all of this is that for each of our organizations, it's a very relational process. We want to be in relationship with you and walk with you, whether you're ready to go or years from being ready to go. And like, I think it was Chasey that shared earlier, we're also like, each of our organizations has a real spirit of wanting to be working together with other organizations and find the right fit for you. And so in that relational process, that's part of it, is helping guide you toward whatever organization is going to be the right fit, even if we're not. Hopefully you all saw that there's a Q&A box where you can ask any questions. We're gonna open it up for a little bit of Q&A for the next few minutes. So if you have a question for one of the mobilizers on this call, please submit it to that chat box. And we'll be working through them, and you'll get a chance to hear more about each organization and how to get connected with us after the Q&A. But the first question that we have submitted is, out of these 4 organizations, which ones are geared towards long-term missions?
I think all of the above. I think we all are. And I think we all have short-term opportunities as well, but I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think long-term or longer term is definitely something that we specifically at Crossworld, and I think everyone else on the screen, that's kind of more of our bread and butter would be serving long term, whatever that means for the candidate. But if it's 10 years, great. It's 25, great. We have people that are retiring from the field every year that have been on the field for 40 years, 30 years, 20 years, and that's great. Awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I'll add from Sam's perspective, we do have a couple of short-term opportunities. COVID has definitely kind of put a stop on a lot of those opportunities, but in general, I think when we're looking at people that are interested in something short-term, we are more interested if they're interested in that short-term opportunity to help them answer if they'll join long-term later. I think we are really looking for that longer-term investment. And also just, I think something that really surprised me stepping into the SAM world is how many, we call them legacy missionaries we have. So 20 plus years spent on the field. I was actually in Brazil a few weeks ago for a conference and met a couple that spent 50 years serving with SAM, retired, and are now living in the Amazon for the rest of their days. And I think that was just a really cool picture of like, I haven't even started my missions journey with them yet, but then standing next to this couple that spent 50 years serving with Sam. And so I think it's been really encouraging to see how much they care for their missionaries and seek to sustain them so that they're able to stay on the field for that long and still be excited to continue serving and living within that community.
Yeah, Send is very similar to what Tracy said as well. We're primarily a long-term mission organization. We do offer some short-term opportunities as well. And typically, again, those are opportunities for people who may want to explore long-term missions, but aren't quite ready to make that commitment yet, or maybe, want a little bit more experience before going longer term. So even our short-term, our programs are typically like 3 to 6 months. So not super short, but long enough for people to get their feet wet a little bit and see if long-term missions is something that the Lord might be calling them to.
Yeah, I generally say, like, if you're looking to go less than a month, team probably would be a little too much work for you. It's just not the right fit. But unless you're going for like a specific, like maybe missionary support role. So we've got, some people going for a week to do childcare for our missionary conferences or lead worship. So, but that's really unique. I usually say for team, and it looks like other people agree it'd be like a month or longer is more of our sweet spot.
We have quite a few other questions, so we'll keep working through them. If you are a business professional and want to go overseas and make disciples, what would that look like at each of your organizations?
At Crossroads specifically, it does depend on what type of vocation or business, but we try to at least set you up with some initial conversations with like-minded professionals. It may or may not be in a region that you're interested in going, but at least to kind of hear what their journey was like and what they're currently doing on the field. And again, kind of going through that process of, are you able and willing to raise support? Are you wanting to be fully funded through a company? Those are two very different processes. So we have placement resources. We actually partner with another organization that help professionals get jobs overseas. So we are not a job placement agency, we're a mission placement agency. So once you land that job, we're also able to catapult you into where you need to go as quickly as you need to go, if that's the case, if you're transferring for a job. So it really just kind of depends on your situation. It is kind of individualized. But yeah, I mean, we have IT people, we have nurses, we have engineers, we obviously have teachers, we have doctors. So, you know, it's kind of limitless on where you want to go and what you want to do there. So I know Saudi Arabia, East Asia, like they're dying for healthcare, and almost every country in the world you can go teach.
Yeah, I think this
Yeah.
is one of the places we can highlight Crossworld. Like they've been doing this really well for a while, and they're a great expert in it. Something like we're starting to dip our toes in is international church placements, and Kirsten's actually kind of our go-to person for that. But if someone wants to take a job, like a ministry job overseas with an international church that is reaching out to professionals usually in that community and being really missions minded, then that's something that we're starting to explore as an organization. But I will say we're on the front end of it in learning. So you kind of be a little bit of a guinea pig, but we look to provide community, that member care services, the family services, and then also that training piece. I think that's where organizations can help in these kind of non-traditional sources of revenue.
Yeah, I would say that same for Sam. Like we mainly have traditional missionaries where you're support raising and going, but we do have a couple of ministry locations where we're starting to look into opportunities to start businesses that are more for profit and generating revenue to help with other our ministry expenses. We also do have needs for administration roles and teaching. We have a couple of SAM Air bases, so ministries focused around flying, and we have some like business roles within that, operational management and whatnot. So it's a little bit hard knowing exactly when you say a business role. That's a very big umbrella. So I would definitely encourage you to reach out to one of our organizations to learn about what some of those more specific opportunities could look like.
Yeah, similarly with Send, I would say that's probably not necessarily our area of expertise, but we do have some, teachers. We have some people in professional roles on, depending on the team, on the field, and what their context is. So it's something that we could explore with you, but again, probably just be more of a case-by-case basis whether or not we would be a good fit for what you're looking to do.
One of the other questions that we have is someone whose church is interested in doing a recurring missions trip to a set location. Are there different things that a church would need to look at in a sending agency that would be different than an individual going?
Yes, I love this question. Yeah, so thanks for asking. Yeah, I think so. Well, some things would be the same, but I think an agency that's able to work with you in your church's process and your church's expertise is really important. And I say that as an organization who in the past has struggled to adapt our systems that we think so highly of to serve the local church. But yeah, I think working with an agency to be like, hey, what would this process look like with you? How can you accept our expertise, our vetting, and how can we also submit to your expertise and your vetting? I think also looking at where your missionaries currently serve, is the organization able to get you there to support those missionaries in a recurring location? Yeah, those would be the two big things that I think of.
Yeah, I think something that I've mentioned before with Sam, but we want all of our missionaries to be sent by a local church. And so with that, we have a lot of the local churches that are pursuing partnership with Sam through more than just the one missionary that they're sending. So with us, a lot of times we really desire for the short-term trips to be geared towards a missionary that is long-term on the field. We want to send our short-term trips there as a support with someone who can continue and maintain the work that is done there. And so I think with that, there's a lot of just finding the right fit. So what is your church looking to do, and what missions opportunities do we have more long-term that are already set up that would be willing to receive your church? But yeah, I think that that's a great question, and it's really exciting also to hear that your church is wanting to do recurring missions.
I think we have time to talk through probably one last question. One of our attendees was wondering if we could speak a little bit about COVID's effect on missions work, and particularly like the logistics of sending people out and visas, and how we're working with local churches and organizations to work through all of those challenges.
It's hard. It's hard, and it's honestly, it can be day by day. It does seem to be that places are opening up a little bit more maybe than they were even a couple months ago. But even places like Vietnam in particular opened up, and now it's on the highest level of on the CDC. And so that's kind of where that giving yourself some grace and some time and trying to compartmentalize that, like, you're not alone in this, and like there's a lot of people that are wanting to get where they want to go, and it may not be exactly when they thought it was, and we're all experiencing that almost every day, at least here at Crossworld. Like, people are not going either where we thought they were going, or we have someone right now in a country that's virtually teaching students in a different country, and they probably will never get back to that country, at least in the near future. And so it just looks a little bit different. And so it's all new for us as well. As far as like the vaccine or what that is, I mean, that is something to consider, and there are certain countries where it doesn't make sense if you're not vaccinated, and if you are, it might open you up to more possibilities, but you do have to consider that as well, and can limit you in where you're able to go. And it's unfortunate, but it is kind of a reality. And so those are open questions, hard questions that you should be asking your recruiters and mobilizers, because that agency might have a policy, or your country that you're wanting to go to might have a restriction as well. And so those are things to consider. If you have to quarantine, that might be extra support money you have to raise. We've had to have missionaries come home because of certain things, and it's hard. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if anyone else has anything else other to say it's just hard, but that's kind of been our experience.
I think that summarizes it well. I think it's been cool to see like some of our people who, like, in the height of COVID quarantine in the US, like raised their funds faster than we've ever seen missionaries do it. And it's just a complete God thing. Now, those people had to wait in the States longer than other people had to. But even then, I think most of them would say that was the worst, but also the Lord taught me so much. The Lord developed things in me or my kids that needed to be developed before we went overseas. I think a big thing for us at Team in our church engagement side of things is that we've got a lot of churches asking, like, what do we do with the missionaries who can't go back? And how do we serve them, care for them, but also, like, what's our responsibility? How do we make sure we're being wise stewards of our resources and funding? And so a lot of our church coaches have been working on that end with churches to educate, and then also just learn from the churches as well. What do the churches need in this time?
We're gonna move on here. If your question didn't get answered, we'd love to stay in touch with you and follow up after this, and there will be plenty of opportunities to follow up with us. So please write your question down, save it, and we'd love to answer it in the future. We're just gonna talk through really briefly before we close out here, each of these organizations and what makes each of these organizations unique. So we'll start with Kyler and Crossworld.
Yeah, so Crossworld, we're a mission sending agency. We're a formative community of disciple makers from all professions, bringing God's love to light in the world's least reached marketplaces. So right now we have about 300 disciple makers in about 35 countries. So we're looking for individuals, mainly long-term, but short-term as well, that's looking to take their vocation or profession or skills, whether that's traditional or secular, overseas, to be on mission. So we'd love to talk to you if that feels like something that you want to do. And we also have an upcoming webinar as well that you'll see more information on what it's like to take your profession overseas to live on mission. So that's on March 30th, but we'd love to chat with you if you feel led to use your vocation overseas.
So South America Mission, our vision is to see dynamic churches multiplied across South America that transform their local communities and the world by embodying the kingdom of God. That's kind of our vision statement. So as you can imagine from our name, our focus is in South America. Our vision statement can really be summed up by redeemed lives, beautiful churches, and transformed communities. So what does it look like for us to live as redeemed children of God, to be at work through the church and to transform the communities surrounding? And we have a variety of opportunities, both in Indigenous and urban locations. And right now, our main countries of focus are Bolivia, Colombia, Peru, and Brazil. So we definitely encourage you to check out our website. And like I mentioned before, if you click the apply now, it's not a trick, but it's just an opportunity for you to be able to connect with me or someone else from our home office to learn about more about our organization and the opportunities we have.
All right, so SEND is a church planting agency working specifically among the unreached, among people who have little to no access to the gospel. And our goal is to build true, deep relationships with people in the hopes of sharing the gospel with them and seeing them come to know Christ in a transformational way. So our vision is to mobilize God's people, engage the unreached, and establish reproducing churches. So currently we are serving in parts of Asia, Europe, Eurasia, and North America. And I'll just add the one thing that I really love about SEND is that we're a big organization, but with a small feel to it. So big in that we're in different locations, lots of different ministries, but small in that it very much feels like a family. There's a great support system and emphasis on caring for our missionaries well. So yeah, definitely encourage you to fill out the Get Started form and get connected with me or one of our other coaches to just talk a little bit more about SEND and about how the Lord has been leading you into missions.
Awesome. And I'm with Teams. So Teams, our mission is to partner with the global church in sending disciples to make disciples. And so really the thing that I think makes us unique is our emphasis on both the local and global church. If someone comes to us and wants to be sent as a missionary, we work with that person, but we also work really closely with their local church on what it means to send a missionary and care for them well. And so I think that's one of our strengths. And then also in the field, everything we do is with the permission or maybe even at the request of the local church there or the global church more broadly, figuring out how do we partner with them and not come in as the experts, but really come and serve alongside them and serve them as they send people out to the unreached places. So I would love to talk with you. If you're interested, you can go to team.org or you can follow us on social media at Team Missions and see some cool stories about what God's doing around the world. We've got a few upcoming events. I think all of our organizations do. So we've got next Tuesday, Team is having a prayer call about Ukraine. And then Crossworld is hosting on March 30th, a webinar called Your Job is Mission Critical. And so Kyler mentioned that a little bit, but just if you're interested, especially in that professional, how do you take your job overseas? I really encourage you to check it out.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. We're going to close out with just a brief poll that will pop up on your screen here. If you'd like to hear more from any of these organizations or learn more about them, you can select any of them or none of them and share with us, and we will follow up with you about that specific organization. And you can expect to have some follow-up emails coming your way about those. So let us know which organization you'd like to hear more about. And I hope you all have a great rest of your afternoon. It's been a pleasure to connect with you.
Thanks, everybody.